At the end of September 2007, Samara resident Igor Petrov was found on the street wearing only underwear. Dry autumn leaves were stuck to them. The body was covered in scratches, with some torn wounds visible here and there. His arms, legs and stomach were smeared with dirt. Apparently someone had dragged him along the ground. Igor was badly shaken, barely regaining consciousness. Everything was blurry. He had no clothes, wallet or documents. An elderly woman was leaning over the man, looking at him with fear. If he hadn't moved, she would have definitely mistaken him for a corpse. The woman was not indifferent to Igor's fate and called an ambulance. At the hospital, it turned out that the victim had severe poisoning caused by a large dose of psychotropic substances. Such cases usually end in death, but the doctors in the intensive care unit did everything possible to save the patient's life. And they succeeded. How Igor ended up half naked and unconscious on a carpet of rough leaves, he couldn't remember. He only remembered what happened before that moment. Literally in the morning, he stopped by the local bar for a drink, and when he left, having partially quenched his thirst with some cognac liqueur, he lit a cigarette. A stranger immediately approached him and asked for money for alcohol. He said he didn't have any on him. "Be a pal, help me out." Petrov helped. The satisfied stranger visited the bar, but he didn't want to leave his savior without gratitude. He went home, took an already open bottle of beer, put it in a checkered bag, and returned to the place where he had met Igor. Igor was still there. He accepted the present and immediately pressed his lips greedily to the cold beer. In one sitting, he drank half the bottle, then passed out and only woke up several hours later. The thing is, the stranger's generosity was not for nothing. He had mixed azaleptin into the beer. The further plan was this, to rob the trusting man and literally leave him lying in the street without his pants. Only later, at the beginning of 2008, Igor would learn the name of his offender, Sergei Kuznetsov. That name would become known throughout all of Samara. Igor Petrov turned out to be the 7th victim of the Kryashensky maniac and the only survivor. Before him, Kuznetsov had taken the lives of 6 men. In 2007, Samara residents started reporting missing family members, fathers, husbands and sons, to the police. The officers understood that there was some kind of connection between these disappearances. However, there was no news from the men, no one saw them on the streets, and no dead bodies were found, so the investigators' theory about a maniac seemed unfounded. Everything changed when Aleksandr Oreshkin disappeared. On a regular weekday, his wife Galina came home from work and didn't find her husband there, who usually returned before she did. Galina got worried, called him. Aleksandr answered the phone, and to the question, "Where are you?" he replied that he was on the highway and that everything was fine with him. His wife was confused. What highway? However, Alexandra's calm tone still reassured her a little. Time passed. 1 hour, then 2, then 3. The long-awaited knock at the door never came. Galina started to panic again, but this time she couldn't reach home by phone. Later, he vanished, and the robot's cold voice repeated, "The subscriber is unavailable." The next day, Galina Oreshkina went to the police and an active search for the man began. A lot was accomplished in a short time. The police officers found Alexander's childhood friend, whom he had met with on that fateful day. To obtain important information, many residents of Samara were interviewed, and Galina herself, not losing hope, even turned to a fortune teller. However, it was in vain. Comrade Aleksandr Oleg assured the police that after the meeting Oreshkin hurried home, and the subsequent events of course remained unknown. None of the passers-by looking at the photo of the missing man could say anything that could help the investigation. The fortune teller of course also did not provide Galina with any precise information, only giving her a little hope. Her husband is being held captive and he will be found only 3 months later. Galina did not give up. She really wanted her beloved person to return home as soon as possible, freed from captivity. Every day, several times, she still dialed her husband's number, but it was all in vain. The subscriber's phone was out of the coverage area. One day, instead of the hateful phrase, she heard the ringing tone. Overjoyed, the woman caught her breath at what seemed like a miracle. Unfortunately, no one answered her. But the very fact that the connection finally appeared awakened in Galina the desire to learn the truth. Where had her husband been all this time? A few days later, a voice finally sounded on the other end of the line, but it wasn't a man's voice, it was a woman's. Galina was surprised, but she didn't ask any questions. She didn't want to scare off the stranger. Instead, she immediately informed the police officers that her husband's phone, judging by everything, now belonged to a completely different person. They quickly found the new owner of the phone. It turned out to be Olga Tabachkova, who worked as a cleaner in a small grocery store. When asked how she got the cell phone, Olga replied, "A friend gave it to me as a gift." Later, the name and surname of the friend became known, Sergei Kuznetsov. The police quickly obtained the necessary information regarding this person. Kuznetsov Sergei Vladimirovich had previously been prosecuted for attempted murder. Forensic medical examination found him insane. He was treated in a special clinic for some time. When the psychiatrists considered him cured, they calmly released him. Olga Tabachkova told the investigators that Kuznetsov meets her every day after work. Thus, there was an opportunity to catch him off guard. At the appointed time, the officers set up an ambush near the store where Kuznetsov's friend worked. Closer to the evening, they noticed a man who resembled the new suspect approach the store and start smoking. For some time, the officers simply observed him and then suddenly jumped out of the car and apprehended him. It was decided to conduct a search in Kuznetsov's apartment, and what they found there left no doubt. Just now, a real maniac had indeed fallen into the hands of the police. The apartment owner clearly had Plyushkin syndrome. Everything was piled up with things. In a huge heap of clothes, you could see men's sweaters, shirts, pants, hats, shoes, and even socks with a distinctive smell. Everything was quite worn and in some places bloodstained. Hidden in this impenetrable mass of fabrics were wristwatches, metal chains, and cell phones. In addition, documents belonging to men who had been searched for throughout the city for several months were found in Kuznetsov's apartment. Here they also found the passport of Aleksandr Oreshkin. Kuznetsov's neighbor, Irina Makushina, readily shared her long-standing concerns about his apartment with the police. There was always a rotting smell coming from there. My sister and I thought he was keeping corpses there, she said. As it turned out, the woman had also contacted the police, but no action was taken. And so the mysterious dwelling, whose owner had tightly sealed the windows with large iron sheets, continued to harbor a terrible secret for several months. Irina described the neighbor as having a terrifying appearance, always dressed in rags. They feared interacting with him. The maniac, brought to the police station, denied everything for a long time, questioning the need for the criminal activity. However, when he was told about the overwhelming amount of evidence which would have been reckless to dispute, he confessed to everything. Yes, he hunted Samara men, choosing victims who were elderly or middle-aged. He would approach them with a casual question like, "Could you spare a cigarette?" And then he would gain the poor men's trust, ask them about their family life, and nod his head sympathetically. And in turn, he would share his own joy, saying that he recently had a baby boy and that it was time to celebrate. Kuznetsov would carry bottles of beer or vodka with him, into which he had already mixed powerful psychotropic substances in advance. No man could refuse such an offer, and by doing so, he was signing his own death sentence. When the victim drank, he would weaken right before his eyes. Kuznetsov would get on the bus and take the man to the outskirts of the city, where no one could interfere with his plan. The maniac would undress the victim, steal their valuables and documents, and abandon his drinking companion on the cold ground. After lying like that for some time, the half-naked men would die from poisoning. Thus, Kuznetsov was responsible for 6 lost lives: Samilin, Oreshkin, Chernyshov, Alexeyev, Pudovkin, and Denikin. In the forest belt near the Volga State Farm, the bodies of men were discovered, most of them completely decomposed. One of the skulls belonged to Aleksandr Oreshkin. Just as the fortune teller predicted, Galina's husband was indeed found exactly 3 months after his disappearance, only he was no longer alive. The investigator was interested in one question: why? What was the purpose of these crimes? The maniac shrugged, saying, "I don't know," then added after a moment, "I just hate people who drink." From Kuznetsov's relatives, it was learned that he had always been withdrawn. The maniac was born in 1974. Already at the age of 5, he developed a tendency to steal. Little Seryoja would steal money from his father's jacket. When his father asked him why, he would also answer vaguely, "I don't know, let me have them." At the age of 14, he committed his first crime. Together with his brother, who was also under 18, he attacked a taxi driver. It was after this that he was registered at the neuropsychiatric clinic. As an adult, Kuznetsov liked to rummage through garbage dumps, and sometimes he didn't even mind eating a sandwich that someone else had left unfinished. He was always short of money, which forced him to economize. So as not to pay for his girlfriend Olga Tabachkova on public transport, he came up with an unusual way for her to get around. The woman would sit in a large shopping bag and stay there until they got off the bus or train. Strangely enough, none of the passengers seemed to notice this seemingly obvious scheme. The trial of Kuznetsov continued until May 2009. He was once again declared insane and was sentenced to compulsory treatment in a psychiatric hospital. The Kryazhevsky maniac, diagnosed with schizophrenia, remains in the hospital to this day. However, since violent patients are discharged when it is observed that they have become calmer and no longer pose a significant danger to society, it is possible that one day he may be released. The maniac's lawyer agreed with the court's decision, emphasizing that his client was not guilty of anything at all, and that he had simply found the belongings of the missing men at a dump and brought them home.